I don't know. People are saying World War III again. I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard the phrase World War III probably enough at this point, but India and Pakistan are fighting now. India says they'll pursue the Kashmir attackers to the ends of the earth, and a bunch of measures have just been enacted. They say police in the Indian-administered Kashmir claim to have identified 3 suspects, 2 of whom are Pakistani, in the how do you pronounce it? Pahalgram attack. Killed 26 people. India's PM Modi vowed to hunt the Pahalgram gunmen to the ends of the earth. They've taken diplomatic measures against India. Pakistan has closing of airspace, land, and border, and says any attempt to divert the waters of the Indus River will be an act of war. And it is being suggested that war may break out at any moment between India and Pakistan, which is already bad. But then you add all of the other war fronts, and sooner or later, China's going to say, break the dam and take Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, look, just so that way everyone's on the same page, you know, both Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons, and they hate each other, like in a way, like with a burning fury. There's religious disputes there, and they're essentially the same. You know, they come from the same background except for the religion. But yeah, they've both got nuclear weapons.
Pakistan's got 170.
Yeah, I mean enough to you know, spark something off. And I don't know what the United States posture is.
India has 180.
I know the United States looks at India as an ally. I think we look at Pakistan as at least friendly to us. We did have pretty good relations with Pakistan during the war on terror, if I understand correctly. But I don't know if the U.S. picks a side. I don't know if the U.S. gets involved. It's likely that because of the posture between India and China, China sides with Pakistan as opposed to India. And that's, you know, it's historically the U.S. has been fairly friendly with India because of India's history as a British colony. And so I don't know what it turns into, but it's definitely a tinderbox that could leak over. I mean, everyone knows, not everyone knows, but most people are familiar with how World War I started, and nobody thought that one man being assassinated would set the whole world into you know, global war. That, I mean, really, it stopped for 20 or 30 years, but World War II was literally an extension of World War I. So.
Yep.
Yeah, you know, this thing is really interesting because we're talking about China and the tariffs and Russia and all these things. So what the U.S. right now is actually trying to do is to decouple China as like the manufacturing powerhouse of the world and replace it with India. So there's been this proposal that's been enacted by President Biden, now President Trump supports. It's called the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. So basically what that means is that goods would be manufactured in India, not in China. They would be shipped to Saudi Arabia, into the Middle East, and then on to Europe. So I'm not surprised to see that Pakistan or some terrorist groups in Pakistan that are supported by countries like China, Turkey, which has a lot to lose by this alternative corridor, are supporting this kind of stuff. So I think these kind of conflicts are going to heat up, and I think a lot of it is being driven by economics, trade, and other issues, more so than just these random attacks. There's nothing ever random at this level.
Wouldn't you say that kind of incentivizes China to help Pakistan further, or that's more incentive for China to help Pakistan?
Yeah, so what's going on is China has this thing called the One Belt, One Road, and Turkey is supposed to be the transit route into Europe from the goods going from China. So Pakistan, being an ally of China, I think is completely in line with what you just said, that China would continue to support Pakistan to destabilize India, to prevent India from surpassing or replacing China as this new hub that the United States wants.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole lot of bad news.
But do you think it's going to, do you think we're at risk of all of these different regions destabilizing?
Yeah, look, I think the world is being split off into spheres of influence right now, and I think President Trump understands that. I think Vladimir Putin understands it. I think the president of China understands it too. That's why I think that mineral deal with Ukraine was all about. It was about basically de facto dividing East-West Ukraine. The United States and Europe take over the West. Russia has some sort of influence in the East. Then you have this issue going on now with that I just explained with Pakistan and India. It's splintering, And the United States rightfully is focusing on its own backyard. That's why Secretary of State Rubio, his first foreign policy trip wasn't to the Middle East. It wasn't to Asia, it was to Latin America. That's what Greenland's all about. That's what the Trump doctrine's all about. And that's what these investments in Latin America are really all about. That's how I see things like going on in the world right now.
Yeah, I don't know how much more of the World War III I can take.
Yeah.
I've certainly had my share of videos where it's like, Russian guy says World War III has come, and the Russia-Ukraine thing is World War III. You've got China ready to take Taiwan, and then you've got here at home, what do we really care about? I don't want to be involved in foreign conflict. I did an interview with Seb Gorka that we put up today, and I told him, I was like, he talks big game on bombing the terrorists, the Houthis, ISIS and Somalia and stuff. And I said, I don't want to be this. I'm rather non-interventionist. He made an interesting point. We don't want regime change wars. We don't want to go into countries and flip over their governments. Trump's not about doing that. Yeah. But when you've got people firing rockets at trade ships and cargo ships in the Red Sea, American vessels even, well, we got to stop them. And so it's not an easy answer. And I asked him about, letters of marque and reprisal, and this is the modern version that you get, I suppose. I don't know how the world works, and I'm not saying I can give you a good answer to everybody listening. But when you've got Houthi rebels bombing ships in the Red Sea, shutting down a massive portion of global trade because you can't go through the Suez anymore, what do? Do we just say we don't want to be involved in a conflict with Yemen, so we just let the Red Sea get shut down?
Yeah, I think
do we go to war?
I think these surgical strikes are like they're being impactful and benefiting global trade, global commerce, and keeping these trade lanes open and the sea lanes open, because this is really what it's about. It's about global commerce. If these people, the Houthis, keep shooting down or attacking vessels, global commerce is going to stop. Most of trade is done via sea. Not by rail. So it's very important to prevent that from happening. But also, alternatively, we can't conduct regime change operations anymore. We can't go back to the neocon George W. Bush days where you're overthrowing, tin pot dictators or, replacing them with other cronies and then just having destabilized countries. And that creates a boomerang that we feel to this day. So I think, President Trump's absolutely right on this. And that's probably why Hegseth, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, is facing some pressure because he's in line with that. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the fourth turning? Strauss generational theory?
Yes.
So it's funny because you can keep going back and you have, if we start from the American Revolution, you have an internal conflict between the colonies and the crown, which is internal. Then 80 years later, I'm sorry, that was international. That was, foreign powers like France getting involved in the British War. The Civil War was internal. Then you have World War I and II, which is external. And now there's a question of whether or not the fourth turning for us will be internal or external. But I got to be honest, it kind of sounds like it's going to be both. With the wars we're seeing overseas and the internal fighting between the cult deep state and Trump, it seems like it's going to be everything, everywhere,
I think that's, why we had to stop all these Soros-financed DAs in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles that were really instigating this behavior of criminality, letting the criminals off and the innocents, holding the bag of those type of policies, the war against the police, defunding the police movement, all of these bizarre agendas that were propagated and pushed down the American people's throats, I think created that division. And then you have that in tandem with the open border and this ticking time bomb with millions of potential liabilities that are now in the country illegally. That's a recipe for disaster.
But I fear that the corruption may be too entrenched in the United States. We started off the show talking about this judge. His wife is arrested. Look, I've brought it up time and time again. We were talking to Ro Khanna, and was Ro Khanna born here, or is he a naturalized citizen?
I think he was born here, but I'm not 100% sure.
But he said we should give all undocumented immigrants a path, and he's not wrong to think that. The issue is, of course he does. His parents are immigrants. So in his moral worldview, everyone should be allowed to be an immigrant. Not me. I come from several generations of Americans who, my family was just telling me, fought in the Revolution. Were in the American Revolutionary War. I actually think I may have had family on both sides of the Civil War, to be honest. I have no idea. But I think so. For me, the legacy and history of this nation matters substantially more than it does to an immigrant. They came here, and their history as their home country split with some of America. Mine's just America. To be fair, I have a Korean grandmother, but I don't really know much about that at all, other than, my family was largely just American tradition. So when I look at what's going on with immigration, we've got to such a degree of the children of recent immigrants. I got no problem with immigration over a long period of time. The problem is too much all at once leads to a large portion of your country creating its own culture, its own separate worldview, and then conflict breaks out. And it feels like, I feel like that's where we're heading. Not to be black-pilled. I mean, I can be white-pilled and say that young men are more conservative and more likely to be Christian. So maybe there's a shift back in the right direction. But I wonder if everything we're seeing is just going to result in an internal conflict of some sort because we can't break the entrenchment, at least not in 4 years.
Is it your sense or anyone's sense that if there is some kind of international issue with some kind of war or whatever like that, do you think that would solidify people in America? Do you think that it would drive people apart?
No way. It's going to drive everybody apart. I mean, war happens in Ukraine and the country splits on it. There were a lot of people who thought COVID was going to unify the country. No, it split the country in half. Everything is falling down these lines. And, I got to be honest. Is it just that Democrats are just evil? They're just is it? Because, you bring up an issue and it's like, here's an MS-13 gang member who beats his wife. And they're like, we're for it. And I'm just like, oh, okay. That's a weird thing to be in favor of.
I think, go ahead.
No, I think that's what you were saying, though, about American identity vis-a-vis new immigrants and people holding on to the old country. And I think that what the Democrats are pushing is identity politics to the extent where they want people to always feel like there's one foot in the United States, one foot in some external conflict, whether it's in Latin America or in the Middle East. And that's why so many of the Democrats are so invested in all these conflicts, and they're always on the wrong side. They're always supporting, Hamas, for example. They're always supporting, anti-American policies, Native American policies, whatever you want to call them. And I think that's something that Trump is completely against. And when he says he wants to unify the country around the red, white, and the blue, that's why the Democrats are so hateful against it. They call him a fascist, a nationalist. That's how I see it.
Well, I think AI is going to wipe out the planet, and I think China's going to win. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but AI is stealing all of our IP to program their AI, and in the United States, you can't do that.
If the U.S. doesn't, if the actual federal, and I hate to admit this, but if the federal government doesn't do something about, first of all, IP theft, and second of all, doesn't start actually dumping real money into power generation and the ability to make, high-tech advanced chips here, we're gonna lose.
Look, when I was discussing the singularity, the ability of an AI to invent things for you, the reason people are freaking out is because China may get there first, because they just steal our tech. In the West, we're constrained by IP law, and IP law is a good thing. But China is, the Chinese Communist Party is evil, and they're not constrained by any of this. If they can get to the point where they reach artificial superintelligence first, and then say, generate schematics for cold fusion or other weapons technology, they're going to advance so rapidly we'll be left in the dust.
If you're not cheating, you're not serious about winning. And China is very serious about winning. And they will steal as much as they can. They have every intention of beating the United States. And as long as the United States has the policies and the posture towards China that we do, they're going to win. They're going to eat our lunch.
Because the U.S. is playing by the rules and China's breaking them.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
From the World Trade Organization to the post-World War II economic, financial, military architecture that we propped up, that's all dissolving in front of our eyes.
Absolutely.
So that's something that I think we need to rewrite.
And also, to your point, the United States has been... we talked about this before. Tim talked about it a lot. The idea of China being China is rising and the U.S. is kind of has crescendoed and on the way down. And what the policy of the U.S. has been, or has seemed to be, when it was Obama and Biden, was to prevent the U.S. and China getting into a conflict.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.